Good morning. I'm Eric Jacobson, founder of Manufacturer Insights. I'm also a business growth specialist at iConnection, which is a website design and web marketing company. This morning, our guest speaker is Jennifer Cresswell. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Eric.
Jennifer is the founder and principal of ThoughtGrow, which is a consulting and leadership coaching firm focused on helping leaders of service-oriented businesses to scale successfully. Jennifer has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Cornell University. Jennifer has decades of experience in leadership roles, operations, business strategy, and communications, and is a problem solver at heart. Jennifer helps business owners create their legacy through sustained growth and development of foundational processes. She has successfully integrated very different business models while increasing both team morale and overall revenue. I'm excited to have Jennifer here today. Our topic, how to eliminate single points of failure in your business. Single points of failure in a business. So if you're a business owner, you need to understand your business model and the types of business models available as a starting point. Jennifer, typically when you're talking to businesses, how do their business models break down? What do you say?
Eric, when I work with a lot of different clients, different size businesses as well, oftentimes you'll see smaller businesses fall into what I'll call the hub and spoke model, where you've got one central person, often that's the owner, and everybody reports into the owner. You have senior people, you have maybe some junior folks that are supporting, etc. But the owner's really driving the ship, so to speak. And that's totally normal. That's how a lot of companies start. And it's something that owners are very passionate about their businesses. They want that control. They want to teach their employees really how to do business the way that they want it to be done. But that model isn't necessarily scalable. When you have one person, it becomes, as we talked about, a single point of failure. And I want to tell you a story real briefly about this charismatic leader, a very charismatic leader who was beloved by all of the customers. They loved him. He knew them by name. They knew him. He knew about their families. His employees also really loved him. And they appreciated that he was willing to solve any problem, drop anything, have a conversation with them, etc. And the business was growing, so life was good, right? That's what everybody thinks, until that same charismatic leader was starting to feel frustrated and overwhelmed and started to realize that he was becoming the single point of failure. He was stopping business from getting done. And his employees were starting to see that, and his customers were even starting to see that. And that's a problem, right? Because one person can only scale so much. So the key there is creating a model where you're actually doing more delegation. I liken it to almost a hierarchy where you still have the owner, who might be the CEO or the president or whatever title they like to keep from that standpoint. But they start to install a leadership team, folks that they can trust to then manage some of the junior level employees. Again, it doesn't need to be a pyramid shape, so to speak, and the owner doesn't lose control of the company, but it diversifies things. And that story I told you is a personal story. I worked for a very charismatic leader, and we needed to change that structure for the business to remain viable year after year.
It was very interesting to hear your story about how customers are actually able to sense that.
They are. And while a customer who doesn't love to have direct access to the head of the company, right? The company that you're serving, that's serving you, so to speak. But that's not realistic for a growing company. And in order to make sure that you have a company that's going to be sustainable, you want to be able to take that 2-week vacation, especially if you're the owner. You've earned that, right? You've grown that company. So putting together some great people in place who your customers will love just as much as they loved you is really important. The thing that can be difficult is a lot of owners, they have to let go. And delegation is hard. And finding those people that you trust, That's difficult as well. But I always like to say trust but verify. So you make the best decision you can at the time, put good people in place, and keep in mind they're not going to do things exactly the same as you do them. That's okay. No one does things exactly the same way. And your customers may even like this person better than you. Now you got to check a little bit of ego at the door if that's the case, but isn't that a good thing? Don't you want to take that vacation with your family? Don't you want to get some time back to focus more on innovation or other ideas that eventually the company may want to go down a different path? And while it's still continuing to run the current business very successfully.
So you've described one, the charismatic leader at the top of the hierarchy. What other types of models are there?
So you've got the hub and spoke, which you want to stay away from. You've got the hierarchy where you have the leader, but you also have what I'll call a core management team. And your business will experience stress if one of those top key people, even if a key salesperson leaves, the organization will experience stress, but you'll recover from it. Your employees will feel really good that the company is strong, and your customers will see that and feel secure that the company will continue to deliver for them. That's a hierarchy model. One of the other ones we hear and see sometimes is, I call it a matrix model, but it's more like a dotted line reporting structure. This, a lot of people look at that and go, is it really scalable? It seems a bit chaotic. It is scalable. It is something that you can put in place, but you really need to make sure your roles and responsibilities are clearly defined so that people understand what's expected of them and what's expected of others. And you need good processes in place so that you understand how people should be working together and how decisions are made. Otherwise, it really can be chaos. But I've seen a matrix model work very well with those clear parameters. And it's not a rigid framework, but it's a framework. So you need to make sure there's at least some structure that people can work within.
So what are some of the benefits to a business owner or just a business in general of adopting specific models?
It really is about scaling your business and supporting sustained growth, being able to grow, being able to increase your business, add more customers, service more customers, and owners care profits, right? It's not just about revenue, it's also about profits and making sure that you're taking home the money, you can pay your people well. That's really the goal of creating something that's scalable. At the same time, not everybody wants to grow. Not everybody's worried about creating the next big corporation, and that's okay. But if you have a scalable model, it's sustainable. It means you're not going to have to worry year after year that, oh, if this one person leaves, the whole thing falls apart. Having a sustainable business is great. You're still working hard, but you get rid of some of the stress of the unknown and will we survive. You also ideally are creating a legacy, something that you can pass on to the next generation or even sell and take all that hard work and those profits earned from that hard work into the next stage of your life, whatever you might be doing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned legacy. I was talking to a business owner recently, and one of his objectives is to actually leave the business to the employees. Inherently, there's something about leaving something in a position of strength. So by adopting these models, whether you're interested in growing or not, that idea of scalability, but also just when you build a house on a solid foundation, it'll last forever. If you build it on a weak foundation, it doesn't take much to dislodge it. Things happen. For a business owner where it's hard to give up kind of control, perhaps, how does a business owner identify if they're delegating, who's the right person to delegate to?
So it's a combination of what I'll call, and I allude to this a little bit, and we've had conversations, but looking at the entire foundation, focusing on the foundation of their company. There are four key pillars that I reference: structure, team, process, and culture. We start with structure. And why structure? Because structure is defining those roles and responsibilities that your company needs to grow or just be sustainable. Once you have those defined, and again, I think of it as an org chart without any names. But I also caution people not to go back and take their org chart and remove the names, because odds are the people are doing more than one role, especially in smaller and even in mid-sized companies. You've got one person handling many roles oftentimes. So if you know what those roles and responsibilities are, then you can start to figure out who the right people are. And that's putting the right people in the right seats. You may have some of those folks and you may need to move them around to get to where you need to go. You may need to hire some additional folks. And one of the things we always talk about with our clients is really about, it's not just the skill set, but it's the mindset. If you're a company that wants to grow, you need employees that have that growth mindset, that are excited about that, that are ready to tackle some of the challenges that come with growth. That's it, and it drives into the culture part that you were talking about as well. If people are like-minded with their mindset and they have the skills, or they want to grow their skills, develop the additional skills that they may need, that'll help you form a really strong team and you'll be able to build on that team.
So, Jennifer, you mentioned the foundational pillars. Let's take a step back and, I'd like to introduce the four foundational pillars. So I'm going to pull up this graphic here. Could you just talk about the four pillars, just a high level? Let's introduce those and let's start with that.
Absolutely, Eric. I work with a number of businesses who have a good business model. They have the bones, it's going to work out well, but they're still overwhelmed and feel like they're running in a lot of different directions. So they come to and they're like, okay, I have the model. And so you need to focus on the foundation. And this is what the graphic that everyone's seeing right now. It's really a combination of structure, team, process, and culture. And they build on each other. This really creates the backbone of your company and supports that sustainable growth. Starting with structure, from the standpoint of it's not rigid, it's not limiting. When you take that out of your minds, when you think about the word structure, think of it as defining the key components of your company, roles and responsibilities. We talked about that a little earlier, right? So it's really, what does the company need and what are the responsibilities of those companies? That defines your structure, which then sets expectations for how people can be successful and how they're going to work together to reach their common goals. That drives right into team, which is putting the right people in the right seats. Very familiar. EOS talks about this. You mentioned EOS earlier. It really is about making sure you have the team that you need for where your company is going to go. And I mentioned earlier how it's a combination of skill set and mindset and trying to understand the people that you have. We have very interesting time right now where you've got a wide range of generational folks, wide range of generations in the same company, in the same workforce. And so finding a team that gels, whether you're Gen X, Gen Z, a baby boomer, there's more people in the workforce now that span multiple generations than ever before. So communication is really key too, and understanding your team and what motivates them. So you know what you need, that's structure. Then you get the right people in the right seats, or you're on your way to that, and then follows process. So as an engineer, I love process. I love efficiency, but process has to have purpose. You don't take a corporate process and put it in a small business unless you want to kill it. And there's reasons for very stringent processes, whether it's compliance, regulation. Some companies have very rigid processes, and there's good reason for that. But I'm focusing on business processes here. Think about hiring, right? Think about onboarding. Think about how do you make decisions when it comes to financials or marketing or sales, right? So there's a lot that goes into those processes. And by developing the good processes, repeatable processes, that's what creates that efficiency and allows the team to function really well together. And then after process comes culture. I put culture as the fourth pillar because to me, culture is not perks and benefits. It's about how you make decisions as a company. How do you inspire and empower your team to do what they need to do? And how do you align them and make sure they're all rowing in the same direction? That's what's going to achieve your goals. That's what's going to help you grow. So I think they're all equally important. However, I would say you often don't need to spend an equal amount of time on each one because businesses will have certain areas where they might be really strong and other areas where they either haven't focused or haven't had time to really focus from that standpoint. But I do believe they're all of equal weight.
It sounds, as you were describing that, you go one, two, three, four. So you may be working on all at once, but predominantly you're starting with structure. It's correct?
Yes, that's right. We start with structure. And yeah, you're right. There's probably a little bit of work that goes into all of them. But if you don't have your structure defined, it's really hard to evaluate the team that you have in an unbiased way because you're forcing yourself to look at what they're doing now and you're forgetting about what do you need? What does the company need? What do you need for them to be doing in the future? And that may not be the structure that you or the roles and responsibilities that they have now. It may need to change. So that's why structure is so important in the beginning. Although I will say there's a lot of owners out there who know what they need and know what they need to move forward, and they get stuck on team. It's this person's really good at this. But did you ask them if they would like to do something else, or they would like to expand, or they want to be a manager? There's different things. It's not all about the skills you have now when it comes to team, but it's the skills that you may want to develop, and how can the company support that if that's a really valuable employee? Most of us out there have made a bad hiring decision. I have made a bad hiring decision before. It's one of those things that it is what it is. You make the best decision you can at the time. But if you're not, you really want to evaluate your people because you may find out your top performer is great at what they do, but they may actually have another skill that's more valuable to your company and that they would rather be doing. So don't be afraid to take someone out of a role that they're actually very good at and doing well if there's a potential for them to even play a bigger role or play a more important role doing something completely different. And I think that's something that a lot of business owners and even leaders can be a little hesitant about. And I understand that hesitancy, but business is an art and a science. You're not going to make 100% of the right moves, but sometimes some of the moves that you make that you're a little unsure of can end up being the best ones.
So with the team pillar, we're talking a little bit about the mindset of the employee. If there isn't an opportunity for them for direct upward mobility from maybe their current position to another position, how should leaders keep their employees, engaged and happy?
So the first thing to really figure out there is, does the employee want to move up in the organization? Is that what's going to make them happy? Not everyone out there wants to be a manager. Some people feel that's the only path to getting paid more or to be more valuable to a company, even though they don't really want the management of people, which is very different than being an individual contributor. Understanding what drives that person, you may be able to find a role that is more of an individual contributor position that's very valuable. They could head up a specific strategic project where they're not they're not a direct manager for people, but they might be managing a project. Or you might find something call it a lateral move. I look at my own career path, and it was not necessarily a straight line to anywhere, right? It's jumping around from here to there. And a lot of people are very happy with that because they're learning something new and they're working their way up by learning new skills. So I think understanding the motivation and what types of things your people want, showing them how they can feel valued, how they can eventually make more money, and that there can be bonus structures. It doesn't all have to be, yes, we're going to move you into a new position and yes, you get like a huge salary raise. That doesn't exist anywhere. That's just not the nature of business. Even when you get promoted to a manager, it may come with a salary bump, but there's a lot more expectations. So it's really understanding what drives them and how can you best support them assuming that fits within the organization.
Before you go making a decision and promoting someone, there's a dialogue, there's conversation,
Mhm.
things that lead up to that. The other thing I wanted to touch on, so it may not, as you said, it may be just satisfaction. And John Maxwell has a saying, he was asked once, what if we send this person to for further education and then they leave us? And his reply was, what if we don't educate them and move them forward and they stay? You're worse off. Part of the question was, how do you keep them engaged? And
Mhm.
that isn't necessarily promoted. It's, in our industry, giving someone additional marketing classes or access to further education to help them be more effective at their job and happier. It's not always about a promotion.
Absolutely. And the other answer, or I guess an answer, if somebody asks me, I send my folks to even management training or this training, and then they leave. I've looked at clients and said, so what? I said, and maybe someday they'll come back to you and they'll be even better. We should look to help everyone be their best selves. And I know that sounds a little probably pie in the sky, a little altruistic, but if people are bettering themselves, then they're going to look back on the opportunities that you gave them and they're going to see that as positive. So if and when they leave, they'll be able to recommend you to others. They might have another person. Oh, you worked for that company. What was that like? It was a great experience. They gave me all of this. Now I've been able to take this stepping stone. And way back in the day, if I can even say that, there were companies out there who wanted you to leave and go get other experience and then hired you back at a higher salary and et cetera. Experience isn't bad. Training isn't bad. And you're right. If you don't train the people and they just stay and they're not getting better and the company will start to outgrow them. And then you've got a bigger problem. And that's not good for the company or the person.
Let's talk about your favorite pillar, an engineer's delight process. Part of developing a process is starting with the end in mind. So where you may want to take your company, maybe you could talk a little bit about that and then work your way back to working with your customers in developing processes. How does that happen?
It's a great point that you bring up, Eric, because when you're thinking about maybe your legacy, the legacy of your company, maybe that legacy is to eventually sell the company. There's a number of different factors that make a company very attractive to buyers. One's revenue, big surprise there, revenue and customers, customer relationships. Another one's profit. So it's not just that you have revenue, but that you're actually profitable and the company's throwing off money, et cetera. But another big one that a lot of buyers look for is process. And why? So process, if you have something that's repeatable, then that means eventually that you can leave or a couple key people can leave or be replaced and the company will still run. You still have what we often call SOPs, right? Standard operating procedures, standard operating processes. If those are documented, then it's really a playbook for how your company should run. That's very, very attractive to buyers because they don't have to create it. It's being handed to them. It gives them some semblance of, okay, so and so leaves. That's okay. We might feel a little pain, but people know what they're supposed to do. We can refer back to this is how things should be working. So our customers will feel secure. The employees that are remaining will feel secure. And we as the buyer will feel secure that the company continues and the business continues to be viable. So process can really actually help when you're looking to sell your company. And I think that's what everybody's got processes. They're out there. Whether or not everybody's using the same process in the company, that's something that should be standardized. And then after it's standardized, it should be documented.
So documentation is a four-letter word for a lot of businesses. How do you help businesses, or do you have recommendations on how they go about documenting their processes?
So in a lot of cases with documenting processes, I recommend, especially to small businesses, the 80-20 rule. It's not going to be perfect. And I'm an engineer who likes to have everything ticked and tied. But by the time you get that process perfect, something's going to change and you're going to have to change it. So trying to just start at the high level, map out the steps, and then test it out. Talk to some of the people who are actually using that process and make sure that it's still serving your business. Because some of the processes, and I run into this all the time, this is the way we've always done it. That's great. Is that the way that you need to be doing it going forward? And looking for some of those pain points, because the worst thing you can do is have a process, you document the process, and then you add technology on top of that process, thinking that it will make it more efficient. And your process wasn't efficient to begin with and wasn't serving the purpose that you had intended. So if you went through all of that without thinking about, is this efficient? Is this still serving that purpose? Then adding that technology on it will actually potentially make it less efficient and cause more headache for your team. So figure out if we go back to the steps, do you have a process? If you have a process, does it serve the purpose? Now is it documented? And now you can start to try to add technology to help make it efficient.
Something we spoke about offline before we started is, so you have these processes documented. And again, just the way things are changing so quickly now, the whole change management and keeping them up to date. I know with websites, people will launch a new website, 5 years go by and it's all outdated. So it's so important to keep that documentation updated. I don't know if you had any comment on that.
It is. It absolutely is. At the same time, you can't stop business from getting done. So I say periodic reviews, or if something materially changes in your business, whether you've added a large customer, you've lost a large customer, something has changed with the regulations or the workforce, you're having a hard time hiring, or different things will force a review of a current process. And some of that is actually feedback from your team. You'll know if the people using a process are frustrated. That's something. Now, you may not end up changing anything. It may be what it is, and it is what it is, and you're not going to get upset about it anymore. But you should take note of that, and you should consider whether or not it should be reviewed. And maybe there are some changes that need to be made. Maybe you've got a new employee with a different skill set that's providing a different perspective that will actually help you move forward. So I say periodic reviews. I don't think you should be looking at your processes on a monthly or even a quarterly basis. Depends on how quickly you're growing and whether there's material changes. I look at efficiency as freeing up time. It creates space so that you can give that back to your employees, your leadership team, to innovate. If you're the owner, and many owners are what I like to call, in EOS terms this as well, visionaries. They've got lots of ideas. They're moving in a million different directions. They're very innovative. If they get bogged down with just the run of the day stuff because processes are inefficient and they're just putting out fires all day, there's no room for innovation. They may have an idea, but it likely goes nowhere. If things are efficient, then you can actually have that space to think about innovation, to be creative. But what I caution companies is, just because something's efficient, that doesn't just mean that people are going to do more in less time. Give them that space to be creative, if appropriate for the role, of course, but don't just try to fill it with more widgets or fill it with more work. Give people that space to breathe, that space to think about the future and come up with creative ideas that will help the company move forward.
So that's kind of a good lead in, I think, to the fourth pillar of culture as we talk about employees. As a leader, how do you empower and inspire your team to perform their best?
A lot of it comes down to communication and what I'll call policies that are people focused. People, especially right now, they want to feel valued. They want to feel that they have a purpose and that the company that they're at has a purpose. And they want to feel, what is their purpose of that purpose, right? So what's their part in the purpose in the company's purpose? I think culture can do that. When people understand how what they're doing impacts the overall company, they feel valued and they feel like they're important and that it matters. I think leaders also need to look at how employees are impacted by changes they might be making, by different policies. Are we supporting our people? Are we providing growth opportunities? These are all parts of the culture. If your culture is a certain way, not everyone will fit into that mold, and that's okay. If you're a company that wants your employees working 10, 12-hour days, number one, I hope you're paying them well. Number two, you got to really find the right people who are okay with that startup mentality. If you can set the culture of your company, it's how you make decisions, it's how you support and help your employees grow, which in turn helps the company grow. And the third thing is really communication. It's how are you as a leader, can be the CEO, can be the leadership team, how are you communicating? And I think you need to be clear, the communications need to be impactful, and they need to be regular. And by regular, I don't mean annually. I think you need a little bit more than annual. It doesn't need to be a daily communication, although in some really small companies, it is because everybody's either together, they're on the floor, etc. But it's really important for there to be clarity, for people to understand where you're coming from, and for leaders to understand the different backgrounds of their team and what motivates them so that they can communicate clearly, meaningful communication.
What recommendations do you have for business owners, leaders, management who may have good management skills or good leadership skills, but they're not extroverts?
And that's fine. Some of the best leaders are introverts. And I hearken this back to being an introvert versus an extrovert. It's where you get your inner power, right? Is it from people or is it internally? But a lot of people don't like public speaking. They don't want to get up on a stage and talk to a room. And that's okay. You can record a video message. We have so many different tools of communication at our fingertips now and your employees like to internalize and absorb that information in different ways. So whether it's a written communication, whether it's a video message, you do need to do some personal communication. But if you're not a big room person, maybe you could have a smaller room, right? Smaller groups, something that's a little bit more intimate, a little less daunting. The other thing I would say to leaders is if you have CEOs, you've got a leadership team, use your leadership team. They can be your mouthpiece. You have to talk to people at some point in time, but that's okay. That's the way it goes. But use those leaders to help create that connection and create that culture. You don't have to do it all yourself.
Part of the reason we had this conversation, there's an end goal in mind. So as a business owner, as a business, may have certain objectives, whether it's to sell the business in 5 to 10 years, about leaving a legacy, gaining more time, having it be a less stressful experience in managing a business. I just want to throw it back to you for some additional thoughts as we wrap up here.
You make some great points there about creating a legacy. I think that's something that all business owners think about at some point in time. It's not about you in the end. It's about what your business is going to be and how that will live on generation after generation. And as we talked about at the very beginning, it's removing any single points of failure, whether that's you as the business owner, and that's okay if it is, you have time, and creating a model that's more sustainable and scalable. And if you have that model already, focusing on the foundational pillars that we reviewed of structure, team, process, and culture to ensure that the business is really attractive for someone to take over, for your employees to take over, for someone to buy. There's a lot of different options when you're thinking about your exit. And if you have a strong foundation of your business, then you're creating business sustainability. And you're going to be able to get what you want out of your business and also have that business continue on for generations.
Thank you for coming today and doing this event with us, and really appreciate that.
Thank you, Eric. It was a lot of fun, and I hope everyone enjoys our session today.